Hi, everyone, and welcome to my third short take as part of the Science and Faith series. So these are just shorter videos that cover a very specific topic. So in today's short take, we're going to talk about intelligent design. And is intelligent design just a God of the gaps argument, or is it something different? So I hope you dive in with me on this specific talk. So what is this common objection? So the common objection to intelligent design is that intelligent design is just a God of the gaps kind of argument. So you may say, well, what do you mean by God of the gaps? So in other words, the criticism or the explanation is that they say intelligent design, or ID for short, is, oh, well, we don't know how this happened. So there's a gap. The gap would be kind of our understanding from a scientific explanation. So we don't know how this happened from a scientific perspective. So then the answer must be that God did it. So that's what it means by God of the gaps. There's a gap in science, so God must have done it. And so one of the objections to intelligent design is that it is just a God of the gaps explanation. Well, if this were the case, that would actually be a pretty weak argument or kind of defense for having God as the explanation for these gaps in science. And so it would actually make intelligent design a weak argument. But is that what actually the design argument actually claims? So what is a God of the gaps argument? So the basic problem is that there's a gap in current scientific knowledge, and that gap is used as the main reason to invoke God. So that's kind of the problem with the gap of the God of the gaps argument. Okay. And why is this considered weak? Well, why would it be weak to say, okay, here's a gap in scientific knowledge, let's just say it's God? Well, if that gap ever closes, then the argument appears to collapse with it. So then what would be our explanation or defense for the existence of God? So this argument actually rests mainly on ignorance, a lack of understanding and knowing. So this is kind of a weak version. Science cannot explain X right now, so therefore God did X. But this is not the kind of argument that Christians should rely on, because if science then explains X, then there is no kind of need or argument for God's existence. So Christians should actually use a stronger argument. So we need to have a distinction between this gap reasoning and design reasoning. So gap reasoning, like I said, starts with ignorance, meaning we don't know what caused this. And so because we don't know this, that's when we bring in God. So there's a lack of explanation, this lack of understanding carries the weight. However, in intelligent design, with design reasoning, it actually starts with evidence. We have this effect, and this effect has features that in our experience comes from intelligence. And so the known cause carries the weight. So trying to figure out what is the cause that will then lead to those effects. And so that's kind of the connection that we have with design reasoning. So design reason asks whether the thing we're trying to explain has features that intelligent causes are already known to produce. So the issue is not whether there's a mystery. There's the issue isn't, oh, we're not really sure what caused this. The issue is what kind of cause best explains the evidence. Okay? So having some mystery, having something that we're not sure about is okay. But with gap reasoning, we just say, okay, we don't know, it must be God. But with design reasoning, we're saying, okay, we see some effects, and those effects would be caused by what? And that's what we're trying to look at. So how does design reasoning work? So in ordinary life, we recognize signs of intelligence all the time. So if you read a sentence, or if you look at a computer program, or an engine, or a blueprint, they don't look designed merely because they're complex. They look designed because they actually contain purpose, function, and information. Because they have these features, we then think, oh, these must be designed. So, like I said, we infer design because we could see signs of intelligence in relation to those aspects. So, to give you another example, so say I'm an archaeologist and I'm going through and I'm doing a dig and I find kind of like a tablet, and on the tablet there is an inscription. Well, I'm not going to say, oh, there's no natural explanation for why this inscription would be on this tablet, so there must be a scribe. And we don't just, give up on geology and just kind of just say, okay, there must be an intelligent agent for this. No, we say that there must be an intelligent agent for this inscription because that's the kind of things that intelligent agents produce. So intelligent agents are going to produce inscriptions and put them on a tablet. So we're not just saying, okay, we don't know where this came from a geological standpoint, so it must be a scribe. We're filling in that with actual known agents or known causes. And so this is the same thing as the idea of the design argument. It's the same reasoning. We're not just filling in a gap, we're actually saying we know of an intelligent agent that would cause these effects to then be produced. Also, it's not just about complexity. So complexity alone is not enough for us to have this kind of design mindset. So we can have random complexity all the time. You can see a pile of rocks that can be very complicated. You can see a cloud shape and how it can be really unlikely. Maybe it looks like a certain kind of animal or something. Or we can see a set of letters, like maybe the letters that you would stick on like your fridge kind of spilled out and it would kind of look complex. That isn't enough for us to kind of assume that there's maybe an intelligent cause. We need specified complexity. So specified complexity means that there's an arrangement that also matches an independent pattern, function, or message. So that is when design becomes a serious explanatory option. So what design arguments look for is complexity, but not just complexity, but specification and function. And we'll get a little bit more into what I mean by that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what cause best explains it. So design reasoning compares causes. It doesn't just stop at, oh, well, we don't know, so God must have done it. We go, okay, here's an effect. What would be the potential causes that could explain this effect? And what is actually the best explanation? So there's kind of three categories for what could be the cause of some effect. So the first one would be chance. So random outcomes. This just randomly happened. So chance caused this effect. Necessity could be an explanation. So law-like regularity. So example, for instance, the effect of, oh, something fell when it was, thrown off of a cliff. Well, the necessity of that would be gravity. Gravity would be an explanation for that effect. So that would be one example of a cause explanation. And another one would be design, an intelligent agent. So the explanation could be, oh, an intelligent agent or a mind caused this effect to happen. And so that's what we're trying to figure out is what is the best explanation for the effect based on our three options for causes. So we're specifically talking about origins questions. So origin questions are often really historical. So what do I mean by often historical? So not every scientific question works like a chemistry lab. So we can't go into the lab and recreate it and test it to try to answer the question. There are some things that kind of have more historical questions. So for example, forensics. If I'm looking at kind of forensics evidence, say a murder, I'm wanting to look at what caused this event. So I'm trying to ask questions of the evidence in front of me to figure out what happened in the past. Archaeology. Who made this artifact? So I'm looking at an artifact and I want to look at, different aspects of this artifact to kind of figure out what civilization or who specifically made this artifact. And so in origins science, we want to best explain the beginning of something, in the beginning of the universe or life or something of that nature. So these are all things that we're using present evidence to kind of infer a past cause. That's what we mean by historical science. Now, this is not anti-science at all. I said historical sciences. This is actually how many sciences reason. So like I said, archaeology, forensics, cosmology, lots of different sciences think in this way. And so what intelligent design advocates want is they want design reasoning to be assessed as a kind of historical inference. That instead, design reasoning is looking at the present evidence and saying what past cause allowed for this present evidence to exist. So that's kind of the format or function of design reasoning. So let's talk about the basic design claim. What is design really trying to actually say? So what design is trying to say is that there are some features of nature that appear to contain reliable signs of intelligent activity. So if we look in nature, there's some things in nature that we say, okay, there must have been the cause of this had to come from an intelligent activity. So let me give you kind of three categories for that. So the first is information. So we look into nature and find information. So coded instructions and meaningful sequences. And I'll give you examples of that on the next slide. Integrated systems. So there's many coordinated parts that are kind of serving a function. Or fine tuning. So very precise conditions required for life that seem to be set to that precise level by not just random chance, but some intelligent activity. So what the design claim is not saying is, we do not know, therefore God. That is not what intelligent design is saying. But what it's saying is we know intelligent causes can produce effects like this, and now we see these effects in nature. So let me give you an example of this. So one example is DNA and information. Now we know that DNA is a very complex chemical molecule, but it's not only a chemical molecule. It also contains a sequence of information. And so we have a sequence, we have a pattern in the DNA structure. And so in the DNA, we have the chemistry, we have the bases, we have the bonds, we have the molecular structure. We have the sequence, the specific order of those symbols, of those amino acids and nucleotide bases. And the function. We have the instructions from the DNA that will be used by the cell. So the design question is not merely, well, how hard is this or how complex is this? It is what kind of cause produces functional information? What would cause DNA to have this information within it? What would be the explanation for how the DNA is structured? So, an objection to this explanation, one of the objections, so that's one thing I want to do is I want to kind of go through some of the objections to intelligent design or design reasoning. And so one of them is, well, future science might explain it, so we don't have to worry about it. And that's a fair point. Scientific explanations can change. We've seen that. Before, we used to think that Earth was the center of the universe, of our solar system, and now we know that the sun is the center. And new discoveries can overturn old arguments, like I just gave an example. But Christians should not pretend otherwise. We should actually welcome discovery. So the history of science began with Christians who started to look at nature with the idea of, oh, if I look at nature and study nature, I could actually understand the creator better. So Christians shouldn't, fear science or kind of push back from it. We should actually welcome science and new discoveries. But having a new discovery does not necessarily mean it's a defeater. All explanations are welcome, but they're all going to be evaluated with the evidence we have. So I can look at all the explanations, but I need to look at what is the best explanation for this effect. Possibility alone is not an explanation. So I can't just say, well, I don't really know, but science might answer it later. Like, the possibility of it being answered later is not actually an explanation. We want to actually figure out what is an explanation for this. So maybe someday is not in itself an explanation. We still have to compare the explanatory power of available causes based on what we now know. So really the right question that we need to be looking at is what cause currently, with all the information that we have, has the best demonstrated power to explain the effect. Now, later we might get more scientific discoveries and more scientific evidence, and then we have to reevaluate what cause demonstrates, has the best explanation or explanatory power for this effect. And we have to continue to do that. And that's the scientific process. It's just to continue to review these things. And so we're saying you have to keep doing this. You can't just kind of delay. So saying, okay, future science might explain it is kind of delaying the explanation and saying, well, no, what is the best explanation with what we have now? And we should actually look at that. Okay. Another objection to the intelligent design or design reasoning argument is, well, isn't this just religion? So there are two levels to keep distinct here, and sometimes they do get muddled up. So there's first the scientific or philosophical claim. So that claim is saying that there's certain features of nature that may be best explained by intelligent agents. So we have an effect. The cause may be best explained for that effect as an intelligent agent. Okay? Then there's the whole theological interpretation. So what that means is, okay, there's an agent that may be the cause for this effect. Now, Christians can take that idea and say, okay, let's connect this design in nature to the creator that's revealed in scripture. They're two distinct things, but for Christians, those two things are connected, but that doesn't mean they're identical. Okay, so the design argument itself can be presented as an argument about intelligent cause. It's not a direct appeal to Genesis or to the Bible. Intelligent design is just talking about this scientific philosophical claim that if we see these effects, intelligent agency can be a explanation for the cause of those effects. So intelligent design is trying to stay in one area. Now, your personal beliefs can take those evidence and that argument from intelligent design and then have a theological interpretation. But the idea is it is two separate things, but some people will take the first claim and then have a theological interpretation, and that's where some people start to think it's only one. So the intelligent design is not a religious kind of argument. It's actually an explanation from science. It's a scientific argument. So where should Christians be careful? So where Christians should really be careful is to not overstate. So avoiding claiming more than the evidence supports. So if we see these effects and we're arguing this is the cause, we need to be able to talk about where are the limitations of what that cause can explain. How strong is that explanatory power? And being open and honest about that. So not really overstating it, but saying right now, given the current evidence that we have, this is the strongest explanation for that effect. Because like we said, more science might come out and that might strengthen this argument or weaken this argument. We don't want to fear research. New discoveries are not threats to truth. If this is an effect that we have studied, we know there has to be a cause. And so if we get new discoveries, we're going to be able to figure out what that cause is, but just more accurately. And it's going to give us a stronger explanatory power. Also, we don't want to use God as a shortcut. God is not a placeholder for confusion. If we don't understand anything, we just don't want to just say, okay, well, God did it, or God's the explanation. God gave us rational minds to kind of figure this stuff out. And so we want to take time to really look into the scientific explanations for the effects that we see around us. And we also need to be honest and say, I don't know when we don't know. Maybe we haven't gotten enough evidence yet to be able to really make a strong argument for what that cause could be. So if we don't know, we should be honest and not just, like the first part, overstate what we think is the argument. And we always need to be respectful. We need to answer objections carefully and charitably, and not just ignore. If somebody brings something to the table, we need to evaluate it and take it seriously and then respectfully respond to it. So where does ID fit with Christianity? So intelligent design is not the whole Christian message. Remember, like I said, there's two parts, the scientific claim and the theological interpretation. So intelligent design is not trying to be the whole entire Christian message. What ID can suggest is that nature may contain evidence of purpose, mind, and intelligent cause. So we can talk about the cause of some of the things that we see in nature, the effects. But what Christianity reveals is an understanding of what might that cause be. It could be the creator, and it talks about more of the creator being personal and good and sovereign and known most fully in Christ. Those are aspects of the creator and of Christianity that intelligent design is not trying to address. Intelligent design is not the gospel. It is not a complete theology of creation. Intelligent design can point toward a designer. Okay? It can point toward a mind or purpose or nature. However, Christian faith goes much further by identifying the creator and explaining his relationship to us. So design points to a designer, whereas Christianity tells us who the designer is. It takes it one step further. So, what is the main point of my talk today? So the God of the gaps argument says we don't know, so therefore it must be God. But design reasoning is saying this effect has signs of intelligence, and intelligence is a known cause of such effects. And so it's actually saying, okay, we're seeing an effect, and we can actually explain that cause by an intelligent mind and intelligent activity. That distinction really matters because it's not just saying God. It's saying that intelligence leaves from intelligence activity leaves kind of marks. And if you have that cause, then you're going to have effects. So design reasoning is not anti-science when it asks an evidence-based question. So it's looking at the evidence. What kind of cause is adequate to explain the effect that we're studying? So the goal is not to use God to shut down questions. The goal is not to stop inquiry. The goal is to ask the right questions about cause, evidence, and explanation. The goal is to follow evidence wherever it leads. Okay? So what kind of cause is adequate to explain the effect, the evidence that we see, and to really dig deep and to find that explanation? That is the goal of intelligent design and design reasoning. So thank you so much for coming to my talk. If you'd actually like to, dive deeper into this idea with DNA and information, some of my longer talks in my longer series actually hits on these points. So you can look at the molecular machines talk or the information in DNA talk in my other playlist. So thank you so much. Here are some of my references for this talk, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye.